This was in early 1967. Things were going bad. The Chinese were helping the Naxalites in Naxalbari, in North Bengal, just few hundred kilometers from Sikkim. The Naxal uprising had started. There were violent incidents, aided and abetted by China at that point of time. So all those things had started. In 1966, as I said earlier, the Chinese forces had moved to Doklam and had mounted pressure on India at that point of time. And India had stood its ground even then. So those things happened in the aftermath of the 1965 war and as we proceeded to 1967. 1967, the battles, I would, again, the book details the battles, what happened, how did they take place, who all participated. But the fact is, 1967 was, it started because of a dispute. Before the battles, General Sagat decided to lay down a wire fence which separated India and China. Because why would he do that? Because the Chinese patrols, like now you see at Doklam, you see at Galwan, and it has been happening at several places along the LAC. You would have read over the years, especially with the advent of Xi Jinping, that Chinese patrols do come across to the Indian side. It used to happen a lot, and at that point of time as well. So when General Sagat objected, he said, we'll put a wire fence that separates the India-China border. The Chinese objected. I will show you the exact location at that point of time at Nathula, where these disputes were taking place. The slide would show you the specific place in Nathula. Yeah. So the Chinese had installed, for instance, I'll take you through some of these slides so that I can show you what was happening at that point of time. These are pictures from 1967, and the Chinese had installed a large portrait of Mao Zedong. This was a part of their psychological warfare tactics to mount pressure in India. They had loudspeakers installed there, talking about how the Indian state had subjugated the soldiers, and they were lower paid, and they were not very well paid, taken care of by the government, etc. So they had lots of these propaganda machinery working overtime for them. So this was one of the things that was there at the line of action control. They had a large picture of Mao, and they had communist propaganda blaring through the loudspeakers that were put out there. So this was something that what was one of the significant aspects of the battles of Nathula and Chola. When the dispute over the laying of the wire fence took place, they led to the battles. The battles were, again, like now, they were started by the Chinese forces. And at the end, the Indians had prevailed. How had that happened was because General Sagat had ordered the use of artillery, despite the fact that the orders for the use of artillery would have had to come from New Delhi, but the Chinese had launched into a barrage of machine gun fire and had killed a lot of Indian soldiers. There was no time left for General Sagat to really go back to Delhi and obtain permission. So he knew that, for him to defend his territory, he needed to take a call. It was a leadership call that General Sagat took, and a leadership dilemma, which if I may put it this way. He had either to obey a protocol, which meant going to Delhi and taking their orders for use of artillery fire against the Chinese, because that is the only way the Chinese would have been defeated, because the artillery, India had an advantage where the artillery guns could reach the Chinese positions and demolish them. And not to have used them would have been a travesty. So General Sagat had a dilemma where he had either to follow a protocol, established protocol of the organization, or attend to the higher call. The higher call was the protection of territorial sovereignty of his country. And he took that call. He ordered the barrage of artillery against the Chinese, and they completely demolished the Chinese bunkers, the positions, and alongside the actions of these soldiers and their small arms with these machine guns, and overall domination was achieved in that Battle of Nathula. What would have happened? And 15 days later, I'll come to that, another battle took place at Chola, where India prevailed again. Now, this is a slide that shows us, and I said that Sikkim was not a part of India at that point of time. China had its eyes on Sikkim. If Sikkim had been captured, what would have happened? If you see this, Sikkim is this little thumb that goes up, which has been marked in a checkered squares, and it sticks into China. If Sikkim had been captured, India, as I said, would have been exposed, because the Siliguri corridor, which is this narrow neck called the chicken's neck, or it's like a squeezed paste from a toothpaste tube. It's that little neck that goes up and then goes into the northeastern states. The northeastern states would have been cut off in 1971 in the war that India had with Pakistan, and which was essentially in Bangladesh. And as I said, Chinese troops would have linked up with the Pakistani troops in East Pakistan. So that is something that was prevented by those battles, by General Sagat's actions of staying put at Nathula and fighting those battles in 1967. It also meant that, if Sikkim had been annexed by China, we would have not had the border at Sikkim. We would have had the border at Siliguri. So can you imagine that we would have been on the plains, and the Chinese would have actually, even if they had not cut us off at Siliguri corridor, they would have dictated terms forever in history by threatening to cut us off and getting us to do their bidding. So this was these are pictures. I'll run you through those pictures. These are pictures of the wire fence being made at Nathula. There was a Grenadiers battalion that was there at Nathula, which was working on creating this wire fence. There was a detachment from a Rajput battalion, which was called in to fight at Nathula. There was an engineers detachment which was there as well. So this had happened at that point of time, and when the wire fence was being made, the Chinese had objected. They had a few disagreements. There had a few, they had come to blows. The Chinese had a political commissar, and political commissars are very high up in their army because the army is essentially a political army. It's a communist party organ. So the political commissar had been roughed up, which annoyed the Chinese. They went back and started to, open a fire. So all those things happened, and that's what led to the Battle of Nathula on 11 to 15 September. So this is again fiction. I wanted to show you, how the Indians were constructing the wire fence, and the Chinese were visibly disturbed, were annoyed, disturbed, irritated, and the various pulls and pushes and brush-ups that happened in the lead up to 11 September finally led the sides to open a fire, the Chinese opening up first. This is an incredible shot. The Chinese and Indian soldiers were up against each other, and they had been arguing, they had been jostling. And remember, this is not 2020 where you can get a camera from various devices to take pictures. This was from 1967, and this was taken by somebody there, and it was preserved. This is again when the two sides, before 11th of September, when the battle broke out, they had a few jostles and their arguments, and this was one of the times when they had become very close to actually bayoneting each other, and things were not looking very happy at that time. it was things would have gone down the hill at any point of time. And that's where the leadership of General Sagat came into focus. He prepared. He prepared for what would happen, which it eventually did when the Battle of Nathula broke out and the Chinese opened fire. He had anticipated that the next level of Chinese aggression would be opening up with fire, because they had been denied their, they had been denied what they wanted to do by an Indian force that was very determined to hold its ground, to not give the Chinese an inch. And China was coming off the 1962 victory, which meant as arrogant, cocky. They wanted to make sure that India will stay back, and thought that they would dominate India.